Welcome to Fortune Forecasts. I am Daisy, your hostess, and you are in my book playlist. We are going to adventure into a new book titled Prosperity Plus, written by John Seaman Garns, published in 1938 by the School of Psychology and Divine Science. If you would like to just jump into the book, please go to the description and click on that timestamp. You will be right there. Prosperity. It's like one of those words that is much used during the holidays, wishing you lots of prosperity and abundance for the new year. Something like that, right? It was the title, Prosperity Plus, that brought my attention and desire to bring this one to the channel in the hopes that that prosperity is of creativity, of wisdom, and of wealth and health and love. So let's dive in to this book and see where it's going to take us. The author in the front page states, Prosperity Plus, brief, informal chapters showing a simple and scientific way to prosperity, harmony, and true happiness. Do you want more of that? Some of that? All of that? Okay, let's find out how we're going to get there. Part 1. Talk 1. Introducing you to prosperity. Don't I wish I could do that thing this very moment? Introduce you to prosperity? Wouldn't it be fine to say, Prosperity, allow me to present my friend blank, naming you? And wouldn't it be ideal if that friendship should never end? Well, perhaps that is what is about to happen. I'm going to do my part. I'm sure you are eager to do yours. And it is an important meeting, any man's intimate acquaintance with prosperity. What more important thing is there in life than that you and I should be delivered forever from the pinch of poverty, and that we should have sinking deep within us the confidence that the primitive old fear that we can't make ends meet should be dead forevermore? Yes, this is certainly important. Some people, of course, pretend to scorn such mental commerce as you and I shall have within the pages of this little book. They say that business is dirty, and they call dollars filthy lucre. But I notice that they spend from 8 to 16 hours a day busily chasing after a livelihood. Most people, however, come to realize that making money is, or should be, a truly creative process, and they would fain know more about it scientifically. They see that even though we are all interested in higher things, that we shall only be able to attend to them with free minds when we can easily supply all our immediate needs, not a bare subsistence level, but in the realm of abundance and even of moderate luxury. But, you remonstrate, do you mean to tell me that any book, to say nothing of this one, can tell a man or woman how to make money? And I reply, that's exactly what I do mean to say. And I have proved the worth of these ideas by asking several hundred people to test their value before writing them down in these pages. I know scores of folk who have doubled and trebled their producing power by means of the principles which I am about to set down. So please, don't prejudge these ideas. Try them. Experiment before you close the doors. I know what the result will be. But, you say, isn't it more or less foolish to talk about prosperity in general? We all differ so much in powers and aptitudes. Different levels of earning power are purely products of individual differences in personal power. And then, economic conditions are so variable. Are there really any universal factors which might help us all to fatten up that old monthly paycheck or enlarge that yearly stipend? Indeed, there are. For, as someone has said, every business or income is but the lengthening shadow of some man's mind producing. That's it. We are either good producers or poor ones, and every man's ability to produce is a law-governed process. Hence, it is subject to improvement. Now, if I could show you that there is a definite science of money making, which lies not outside you, but right down inside your mind, you would be greatly interested, would you not? Well, that's what I believe I can do. I feel absolutely sure that there is a psychology of creativeness which, when applied to business, inevitably succeeds. And I'm not talking theory merely, but as I have said, I have the testimony of scores of men and women that the technique of mind hereinafter explained has helped them from poverty to affluence. These principles work, I know that. And I feel sure that you will agree with me when you have tried them. But naturally, I can't work them for you. What is briefly given you in the following pages is a technique of creative thinking, a way of handling your mind, which, if practiced, inevitably brings results. But you will need to definitely retrain your mind so that you may come to use this technique habitually before you can make prosperity an abiding condition. One night's careful study of these talks and a vigorous application of their theory in a week or two of practice will start you uphill and out of this jam you may be in today. But to make abundance a certainty in your life, keep this little book beside you for a year. Once you write its technique upon your heart and in the habitual reactions of your mind, never will old man poverty dare to show himself to you again. You will find nothing revolutionary or new here. That is, every man or woman has ever succeeded from the beginning of time has done so by the application of the principles hereinafter stated. You have used them many times yourself and have been rewarded. The trouble has been that you did the thing unconsciously and you can't repeat. The function of these talks is to make this law or technique by which you always have succeeded when you did succeed so plain that you henceforth use it consciously and may thus always succeed by a consciously used scientific process and not by a method of trial and error. Anyhow, don't reject this simple teaching till you have put it into operation for at least 3 months. Then you'll know that there truly is a law of prosperity and a technique by which you may make it work for you. And prosperity talks, and her voice is sweet, and her ways are ways of pleasantness and peace. Let these talks talk to you, and then let the law compel prosperity to talk through you. It will, if you give it a chance. Try it. Next section. Talk 2. You already have the power. There is a law of mind which we ought to consider together before we touch the creative technique which I have promised to unfold to you. It has been called by some the first law of mind, meaning that it is of primary importance in all creative work, whether in the making of money, the building of a cathedral, or the writing of a poem. This law seems to recognize that there is a very definite mental attitude which holds over all our activities, making them succeed or fail. Mr. A.K. Mazumdar has stated this law as follows: mind operates under its own conception of itself. If this statement is really true, we can see the reason why we do so often limit ourselves. Whenever I believe that I cannot, my whole mind is operating under this concept of its own impotence. When I believe that I can and accept the fact deeply enough to involve all levels of my mind, both conscious and subconscious, I seem to release superpowers and often actually accomplish the impossible. The history of man's unfoldment is full of thrilling stories of men who have transcended their limitations and have set new goals both for themselves and their world. If one examines a few of these accounts to find the underlying mental causes which released such extraordinary power, he will in almost every case find that it was due to a supreme and unlimited belief in the righteousness of the cause, in the man's own ability to accomplish, or in a cosmic reinforcement which he believed was being given him from outside himself. Basically, it was a kind of faith. Sometimes it took on a religious coloring and was a faith in God, through which the individual believed that he was tapping transcendent and supernal powers. But the strange thing was that whatever he believed he was tapping, that he did tap. This gives us an inkling of the law under which all mental energy is released and specialized. If the man suddenly lost his confidence, as did Napoleon at the very height of his career, or as did Julius Caesar just before the conspirators removed him from their path, conditions no longer obeyed the mind of the erstwhile conqueror, and all that he had built crumbled and went to pieces about him. But if he kept the concept of his own unconquerable creativeness, he invariably won in spite of opposition. Such has been the history of creative minds everywhere, and there is no exception in the case of your mind. This law will work for you in every new adventure. In fact, it is working for you negatively even when your lack of confidence makes you fail. May I quote to you a paragraph or two from a popular poem of the day? If you read these lines superficially, you will see in them only a bit of rather Pollyannish soap bubble philosophy. If you are inclined to be analytical, however, and will test out the psychological law which lies back of these statements, you will find that you are moving back into the knowledge of a principle which will free you as easily and as inevitably as it has freed thousands of others who have apprehended its true nature. The poem is called You Can. If you think you are beaten, you are. If you think you dare not, you don't. If you'd like to win but think you can't, it's almost a cinch you won't. If you think you'll lose, you're lost. For out in the world we find success begins with a fellow's will. It's all in the state of mind. If you think you are outclassed, you are. You've got to think high to rise. You've got to be sure of yourself before you can ever win a prize. Life's battles don't always go to the stronger or faster man, but soon or late the man who wins is the man who thinks he can. This is a popular statement of the first creative law of mind, a law so basic and so demanding of obedience that many of the finest minds have been swept into useless insanity by their lack of fulfillment of its positive requirements. On the other hand, oftentimes very mediocre mentalities, if you would wholly trust their measurements by the Binet test, have been lifted up by the realization of its truth and enabled to deliver into their world powers which seemed little less than miraculous. Perhaps your mind has already gone back to that line in the poem which says, "You've got to be sure of yourself before you can ever win a prize." And you're saying, "But how can I be sure of myself? I know my own weaknesses." But this is just where the joker appears. You are proving that this law works by these very remarks. This very weakness is your conception of yourself, built up by past failures and by a basic misunderstanding of the nature of mind. If you think you're outclassed, you are. It's not a statement of some kind of magic, but a cold-blooded law which will work for you as inevitably and as absolutely as it is now being made to work against you. But granted that we see this principle, how may we apply it positively? Most of us are now handicapped by our limiting conception of ourselves. We are carrying around all the time an emotional undertoning based upon past failures, past unfortunate blunders, other people's opinions, and even childhood impressions of ourselves. I may have the utmost confidence in the creativeness of some other fellow's mind, but mine? That's different. I know too much about me, based on cold facts which may not be escaped. Yet, just here is where we start to obey the law negatively, forever condemning ourselves to operate under a negative interpretation of the power of mind, dictated by our personality conception of ourselves. Our only way of escape is to change this conception of ourselves as a mind limited by these personality memories of ourselves to that of our mind power as abstract mind, with all the creative power of mind universal. Regardless of what the water is like in my own tap, there is a generic conception of water which is H2O. When I think of water, I do not think of the chlorine-saturated water of my home city, but of H2O, chemically pure water. Now suppose for a moment that this conception had the power to make your city water into pure H2O. That's what your conception does to mind. Suppose, then, we moved away from the conception of the mind within our little tap and caught the generic formula of absolute mind. The power to unlimitedly create by thought. Try holding that conception over yourself for a month, returning to it once or twice an hour during your working day, and see what a transformation you will work in the creative potentiality of your own mind. Your mind, conditioned by lack of confidence, will gradually become unconditioned mind. The power to unlimitedly create by thought. In my own little personality, I am limited by my past concepts of myself, by my feeling of frustration, by my inability to handle all my powers at their highest levels of potentiality. But when I operate as unconditioned mind, and begin to think of my mental activities as a part of a universal creativeness, the strange thing is that my mind operates under the law of its own thoughts, feelings, and purposes without limitation, and with an almost miraculous command of outer conditions. Why this should be so, I shall not stop to explain just now. That it is true, you have only to experiment for a little while to prove for yourself. I realize that in the eyes of much of modern academic psychology, these statements are kind of foolish in the minds of superstitious. Nevertheless, this law of belief has been used by thousands of people unwittingly, and it is going to be used by many millions who will practice it consciously and find that within it lies their freedom. You already have the power. The title of this chapter purposes to stress the theme thought that our defeats lie not in limiting outer conditions, but in our ignorance of how to use our own interior powers. Our dreams and desires of accomplishment are really promises of inner power to bring fulfillment. But these potentialities we have not touched because we have not known how to tap them. The basic dreams of every individual's existence are: 1. A prosperity adequate to supply his fundamental needs. 2. Good health. 3. Full and deep expression of the love life. And 4. A superb confidence in his own power to create, based upon a knowledge that within himself is adequate power to deal successfully with every circumstance. These fundamental urges of the inner life are not only legitimate, but they must find adequate expression. And strangely enough, man holds within himself the power to make these 4 central drives concrete themselves into objective realities. Since we believe that the first necessity of every man's life is prosperity, the demonstration of adequate supply, we are making the illustrations of the following chapters follow along this line of thought. The technique by which man establishes prosperity, however, is the same mental method as that by which he may attain any of these 4 fundamental drives of the deep self. Therefore, these pages will be lessons not alone on the attainment of prosperity, but may be applied to the establishment of health, the unfoldment of happy and harmonious social and love relations, and will certainly directly give one the consciousness of his ability to create, growing out of that supremest of all attainments, perfect confidence in the creative power of mind. Talk 3. Our feelings intrude. May I crave your indulgence a little longer while I continue to talk about you and your mind instead of talking directly about money making and prosperity? May I remind you again that you are the agency through which your future prosperity must come, and that you are your mind when it comes to creativeness and productivity. And now, I should like to show you that your feelings are a very important part of your mind and its creativeness. They are doubtless responsible for many of your failures, and they may be made to be largely contributory to your successes. For the mental levels upon which you experience your feelings are the ones upon which are born your convictions and your beliefs. And here lies the secret of why you and I have so often failed to produce. In the preceding talk, two related ideas have been emphasized. First, that our minds act under our own conception of them. And second, that our feeling about ourselves is the very heart of our operative conception. No matter what my intellectual conception of myself or of my mind and its potentialities, it is not operative until translated into a feeling belief. That is, until I believe it vividly enough to anchor it in the subconscious levels of my mind, or as the Freudian school calls them, the unconscious. And perhaps it is well to pause at this point to note the strange double nature of our minds. For many centuries, man has recognized the dualism of his mental nature. Long before Robert Louis Stevenson wrote Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, men had recognized this upper conscious man with his ideas, his rational powers, his will, and his idealizing and imaginative tendencies, while down below this, they were aware of a fluidic, unstable, yet tremendously powerful emotional mind, which more often responded to what man called his lower nature. Often man realized that this Mr. Hyde nature took the wheel and drove like a madman, while Dr. Jekyll sat helplessly in the back seat, impotent to interfere. So man has come to think of the subconscious levels of his mind as evil, and to attempt to repress and interfere with them. A more modern psychological approach shows us that man's primitive impressions were correct in many ways, but that they erred in one important particular. The subconscious or unconscious levels of mind are in no sense evil. They are merely the very capable executors of the urges, tendencies, and habit patterns which have in ages past and in our earlier lives been committed to them. This part of mind is wholly impersonal and quite as ready to be man's servant as his enemy. But he must learn to use it in harmony with the laws of mind's highest potentialities. Now, what bearing has this upon your prosperity and mine? Many very important ones. As we have said, your prosperity is a measure of your creativeness. If money making is the direction in which you are pointing your creative power. Now, understand that your past failures have been largely due to your wrong use of these subconscious activities. A salesman came to me not long ago, utterly dejected and discouraged. He had been steadily slipping back in his sales for almost 3 months. Previous to this, his record had been one of mounting monthly sales. In fact, at just the point where the slump began, he had been called into the office and told that if he could make a certain quota for 3 succeeding months, he would be put in charge of the entire sales force with a good salary and a substantial overriding on all their sales. He was eager to have this position, for he had long desired just such a place. But suddenly, he found himself selling no more big contracts. As the days slid by and his sales record slowly dropped, he was seized with panic. Then he fell ill and was sure that the symptoms indicated heart trouble. But his physician told him that there was nothing organically wrong with his heart. The difficulty was only a bit of nervous indigestion. He was advised to rest, but he could not rest, and this diagnosis did not in the least lessen the distressing symptoms. He was in despair of ever making his quota, and had visions of remaining a second-rate salesperson for the rest of his life. Then he came to me and we went into a huddle to see what had happened in his mind 3 months before, when he had been first told of his prospective good fortune. He finally confessed that when he had been told the amount of the quota conditioning his promotion, it was as if a voice within him had suddenly said, "You'll never make it." And when he left his employer's office, there seemed to be two distinct levels of his mind. One was elated and full of excited expectancy, while the other seemed congealed with fear. When he told his wife that night, she was overjoyed, but he found himself saying to her, "Suppose I shouldn't make it. Wouldn't that be horribly disappointing to you?" She laughingly replied, "Why, of course, you'll make it. We're just as good as in our new house right now." From then on, he seemed to be in a nightmare of fear. Every time he had started toward a prospective customer with a possible large account, he began to have pictures flash into consciousness of himself failing to make the sale, of the man saying quite firmly and finally, "No, we've decided to place our business elsewhere." To some extent, he knew the psychology of his own failure, but though he tried hard to lift himself back into a confident attitude, he had been unable to do so. It was very easy to show him that the subconscious levels of his mind, which did his believing and his feeling, as well as the motivating of his imagination, had all gone over to the enemy and had surrendered to fear, so that he was a house divided against itself. The upper conscious 1/10 of his mind said, "Of course, it will be easy, just what I've wanted," while the lower 9/10 couldn't believe or accept it as possible. Therefore, it feared and drew pictures of failure, expected failure, and poured all its creative energies into making failure actual. Nor was it difficult to show him that this subconscious belief mind would accept and operate quite as successfully any positive thing he persistently affirmed and imagined. We wrote about positive statements of his power to sell, of his ability to make that quota, of his successful closing of large contracts. He affirmed these aloud at home in the morning, and as often as he found himself slipping, he read them from his notebook during the day. In 2 days, he was again producing. The firm gave him an extension of a month on his quota, adding 25% to it, and in less than 30 days, he had sold the 4 months' business and had won his desired position. The feeling mind that had worked against him had been at last taught to work for him. We have found that the first law of mind for producing prosperity or any other desired objective is that mind acts under its own concept of itself. To which we must now add, this works only when mind believes this concept. And with these, we must quickly write a third. That part of mind which does the believing and at the same time furnishes the creative energies for successful operation of ideas is the subconscious. It is impersonal and highly suggestible, and will accept or believe and will make to work whatever conscious mind is persistently affirms and imagines. These are tremendously important principles, as you will readily see. And just as their wrong use accounts for our past failures and our present poverty, so their right use will assuredly bring in the days to come a power to create new business, a fresh sense of confidence and ability, and unexampled prosperity. Talk 4. Business conditions are not causes. Biologically, man is only a few thousand years evolved from animal existence. It is not strange, therefore, that he should still keep some of the animal's primitive tendencies to react to danger either in fear or in savage irritation and resistance. In the presence of danger, the first reaction of the animal is to run, and this very act magnifies both his fear and his speed by pouring increasing quantities of adrenaline into the bloodstream. Superficially, man seems to have outgrown these animal propensities in action. He no longer literally runs away from danger, nor does he often use his fists in a primitive battle. Nevertheless, old Mother Nature still preserves and activates the glandular responses, and every time a business recession is broadcasted by the radio, the newspaper, or the underground wireless of calamity gossip, fear grips the whole industrial structure. New ventures are withdrawn, present arrangements are trimmed, expenditures curtailed, and, like a bunch of prairie dogs, businessmen squat in paralyzed inaction or scamper for cover. Yet, nothing has happened to the real sources of creativeness in the universe. These fear-breeding influences are outside us, while the true power of productiveness lies intact within man, in mind. All this vast and subtle fabric of industrial and merchandising activity has been produced by the creativeness of man's mind. True, he has used the raw materials of mines and forests, of soil and flowing wells, but his motives and thoughts, his desire to have, as well as his joy in producing, have given these raw materials value. Diamonds are not valuable without man's desire for beauty, nor are they acceptable even then without his machines for cutting and his artisans for setting them. Oil wells are valueless without man's hunger for speed and power, and not even then without the intelligence of the refiner's processes. The difficulties imposed by changing trade practices, by demanding labor agitation, by wars and rumors of war will modify and condition the flow of business activity in general from without. But each individual business enterprise is the projection of some man's mind, and if he continues to inject enough of the primary creativeness of mind into it, no external set of influences can wholly defeat him. There is within each of us an unfailing creativeness of mind. And if you and I will learn how to use this available power, we may be discouraged but not hindered, handicapped but not defeated. A few thousand men who knew this law of mind and refused to be stampeded by fear could do much to stabilize business conditions. And they would certainly enjoy generous rewards for their business daring and acumen. The psychology of fear, which grips everyone whenever the stock market breaks or conditions change radically, becomes in itself a cause of further paralysis in business. During a recent mild panic accompanying a business recession, I heard in one afternoon 3 conversations which typically indicate the vicious effects of this fear psychology. One lady said, "My husband and I were going to build a home this spring, but on account of the business recession, we can't build. We have money in the bank for this purpose, and I don't see any reason why we could not. But my husband feels that we should not undertake it with conditions as they are." That stoppage in buying, amounting to several thousands of dollars, is multiplied by hundreds of thousands of other fear-bound mortals and becomes in itself a very powerful bit of secondary causation of these very conditions which we call business recession. I say secondary causation because the primary cause lie in the uncontrolled fear of a multitude of people who have not learned that all primary causation lies in mind, and that men cause their own business cycles and their individual poverty by not meeting conditions with better creative thinking and more fearless action. During the same day, a young woman said to me, "My employer had promised me a raise the first of the month, but the other day he said, 'On account of business conditions, I cannot give you that raise now, my girl.' I have worked for him 15 years and have only had 2 advances in salary. I know that our business has grown steadily better, and I feel that he is using this recession as an excuse." "But perhaps your employer is really afraid," I suggested. "Possibly he is looking too closely at the business thermometer and is too conscious of every little move up or down, fearing he may be caught in an entanglement such as we had 10 years ago. The best thing you can do is to show him by your attitude that you believe in his business and its certain growth. Remind him of its present profitable condition, and then fearlessly suggest that you are worth your right wage to his business. But don't fight. Work it out with him by taking his mind out of fear control, and so make him want to pay you out of his own sense of prosperity. If this does not free him, then it's time for you to move on to another employer." A few hours later, another person said to me, "I can easily see that this business recession is catching, and it will surely curtail my business. No, it hasn't yet, but I'm reefing my sails for the coming storm." So he canceled orders, dismissed 2 clerks, and in this way did his part toward increasing the very business condition he was trying to escape. You see, we do influence such situations negatively by fear thought. Why not do our bit positively by ceasing to talk fear and by acting with courage and discretion? Another way to help is to go back inside ourselves and declare that 90% of this condition is a psychological attitude. Then determine that by added alertness and greater mental productiveness, we will meet the situation fearlessly and perhaps turn it to our advantage. I am not holding this attitude out as a cure-all. What I want you to see is that conditions are secondary causation and that primary causation lies within man, deep in the nature of his mind and its action. You have within yourself the law which produced your business. The law has created this objective world which we call civilization. It is the creative law of mind. Real causation is not outside in a sequence of events that we assume to be cause and effect. For events are outside us in the external world and only indirect in influence. All true causation comes from deep within mind, which, like a great fountain, is eternally pressing up from within ourselves. Unless you see and believe this, you are going to be hindered by fears which periodically steal your creativeness when you most need it. Fears which make you retreat when you need to be particularly alert and generative of new ideas for advancement. Poverty will continually stalk your path and be a source of unhappiness until you learn that outer conditions are not causes and that undefeatable causation is in mind. Next section. Talk 5. A case from life. A man came to me not long ago saying, "Can you tell me how to go about changing my job? I like what I'm doing, but it is seasonal and does not bring me a steady income. Sometimes for 3 or 4 months, I make a wonderful salary, but this may be followed by long months of famine. I'm trained in this special kind of work and in it am well known as an expert. I know nothing else well enough to offer my services for the salary I must have to maintain my growing family. What would you like to do? I countered, for I did not in the least know the qualities and powers which made him an expert in his present job. Well, what I am most interested in outside of my present work is politics. I certainly think this present mess ought to be cleaned up, and I'd like to help do it, but that will not make one a living. No, perhaps not at once, I replied, and it never will unless you have the qualifications to really handle such activity successfully. Upon questioning him further, I found that he was so extreme a radical and of so individual a brand that he would have had to have a new party created just for him. No, I said, you're not a politician, though as a citizen you may greatly help in the establishment of a better order, but don't limit yourself either to your emotional interests nor to the limited field of your past occupation. If we would look upon ourselves first as men, with creative minds and a wide range of aptitudes and potentialities, and only secondarily as farmers, salesmen, doctors, and lawyers, we should find our adaptability greatly increased. Don't limit yourself by labels. I advised him to have careful aptitude tests, and from them we found that he had good executive ability, a good mind for organizing and planning, and no small ability in the handling of men. In addition to this, he had expert knowledge in 2 or 3 lines of production. We began searching for an executive job of just the sort he seemed fitted to fill, but it was not an easy task. No firm wanted him without more actual experience in its own particular line. One day, after months during which we had canvassed the field carefully, I said to him, now we're doing all we can objectively. We have our lines out and we can only hope for the best. But there's another way to move upon this problem. It is by another and more creative use of mind. Do you want to experiment? I'll try anything that will put this project across. What further can I do? Well, I replied, there are many people who are today convinced that there is a technique of creative thinking, and that when man uses his mind in this certain way, that he not only uses his own creative power at its highest potential, but that he predisposes both people and events to respond to his purpose. Why don't you try it? It sounds a bit queer and impossible, but of course, how shall I begin? Doubtless we are already obeying most of this mental technique, but to know its steps and consciously obey them will certainly intensify our creative thinking and so hasten the result. Let me give you a brief statement of the exact nature of this creative technique. Here it is in a formula. When I am conscious that my creative mind is an absolute creative power, whatever I ardently desire, vividly imagine, joyously believe is possible, and expectantly act toward, will inevitably manifest. He looked a bit bewildered. Well, aren't we doing all those things? Yes, I replied, and the only purpose of the formula is to furnish a guide by which you may many times a day repeat this creative bit of thinking toward your desired objective. Do you mean to say that by simply reviewing those actions of my mind, I shall in any way hasten or modify the result of our endeavor to find the perfect job for me? Exactly that, I assented. I confess it sounds at first like a bit of ancient magic or superstition until you consider that mind is radioactive. Purposive thinking does go out into the ether, and that it may possibly be picked up by other minds. Even then, it assumes that mind is not alone a universal medium of communication, but a creative power projecting lines of force and able to influence conditions. We have no adequate evidence for these assumptions in natural science as yet, but whatever the scientific explanation, this activity produces. In such a case, one doubtless has the right to apply the pragmatic test. Does it work? As a matter of fact, by thinking thus, you are only consciously accentuating and intensifying a natural process. Well, dictate the formula to me again. I'll write it down and put my mind in training for a few days. How many times a day should I repeat this mental gymnastic? As many as you like. At least twice a day for 20 minutes or a half hour, and then often during the day revert to it for just a flash of a moment by putting the whole activity into a few sentences like these. I am now realizing myself as mind, the power which creates by thought. My mind is creative under mind's laws. I am ardently desiring the perfect position for me. I am now imagining the type of position which would demand of me my highest powers. I believe that somewhere in my world this position exists, and that it needs me as much as I need it. Eventually, I shall contact it. Mental forces are even now at work to make this contact and establish it for me. I am today instituting some significant action in this direction. Writing a letter, contacting someone, investigating some possible opportunity. I am doing this in an emotional attitude of expectancy. I walk, talk, and think as if I knew that this place was surely on the way to me. I wish you would write that out for me. I'd pull it out and read it a dozen times a day till I got these sentences and the attitudes behind them by heart. So I wrote them out and he took them with him. After this interview, I did not see him for a full week. Then one day he turned up. I don't see anything happening. The first few days were fine, and I do believe repetition of these affirmative statements helped to keep me pointed forward. But when nothing tangible happens, I find it hard to go through these mental activities with proper conviction. I'm not sure I see how such activities could be significant. Can you give me a concrete instance of how it works? The best illustration I can give you of just how it works will be an ancient parable, giving practically the same formula in an allegorical fashion. So I gave him the substance of what I have written down for you in the next chapter. End of section titled Talk 5. Hey, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and meet me at the next video where I will be there with Talk 6, How It Works.